They thought I was finished. They were so certain, so comfortable in that certainty, that they didn't even bother to lower their voices in the hospital hallway. I heard everything, and that was their first mistake. Before we go any further, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. It means more than you know. The stroke hit me on a Tuesday morning. I remember that clearly because I had just made coffee, the good kind. The kind my wife Helen used to grind fresh every morning before she passed. I was standing at the kitchen counter with the mug in my hand, and then the floor came up to meet me. That's the last thing I remember before the lights went out. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital bed, with a tube in my arm and a stranger's face hovering over me. "Mr. Watkins," she said. Her voice was gentle but careful. The way you speak to someone standing close to an edge. "You're at Mercy General. You've been unconscious for 72 hours. My name is Dr. Chen. Can you tell me what day it is?" I couldn't. I tried to speak, and what came out was a sound I didn't recognize as my own voice. Dry, cracked, like something long unused. She smiled anyway, wrote something on her clipboard, and told me I was lucky. That word landed strangely. Lucky. I had tubes running into my arm, a machine beeping beside my head, and I couldn't feel my left hand the way I used to. But I was lucky. "Your family was notified," she said, straightening the sheet over me. "When you're ready, we can talk more. When you're ready." The phrase stuck with me because something in the way she said it told me I might not be ready, that there was something on the other side of those words I wasn't going to like. I lay there for a long while, watching the light change on the ceiling tiles, listening to the hum of machines and the distant sound of cartwheels on linoleum. My left hand sat on the blanket like it belonged to someone else. I tried to curl my fingers and managed a slow, uncertain clench like a fist learning itself for the first time. My son Marcus, my daughter Denise. I pictured them in the waiting room. Marcus with his arms crossed the way he did when he was anxious, Denise holding her phone but not looking at it. They would be worried. Of course they would. I was their father. I had given them everything I had. When Dr. Jen came back that evening, she sat in the chair beside my bed. She didn't stand this time. That told me something too. "Mr. Watkins," she said, "I want to be straightforward with you because I think you deserve that." "Go ahead," I managed. My voice was still rough, but the words were coming easier now. She folded her hands on top of the clipboard. "We contacted your son Marcus on the first night. He asked about your condition and then asked about your prognosis. When I told him it was serious, that we weren't sure yet whether there would be significant neurological effects, he asked me." She paused. She looked down at her hands. "He asked me whether you had a do not resuscitate order on file." The room was very quiet. "He's 43 years old," I said, not because it was relevant, just because it was the only thing that came out. "I understand," she said softly. "And my daughter?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Your daughter Denise said she would come as soon as she could." That was 3 days ago. I turned my head toward the window. The sky outside was the particular gray of a southern winter, flat and without depth, the kind of sky that promises nothing. I had looked at that same kind of sky from a different window 20 years ago, the morning after Helen's funeral, and felt the world empty itself out around me. I had survived that. I had gotten up, made coffee, gone back to work at the hardware store I had run for 31 years, and kept going. I thought about Marcus asking about a DNR. I thought about Denise promising to come and not coming. And I thought about the fact that I had worked those 31 years, built something from a single rented storefront into 3 locations across 2 counties, paid for Marcus's business degree and Denise's nursing program, handed Marcus a down payment on his house the year he got married, and sat in the front row at every performance, graduation, and ceremony they ever had. I didn't cry. There was nothing behind my eyes that wanted to become tears. What was there instead was something quieter and harder, like a door swinging shut on a room you've been standing in too long. "Thank you for telling me," I said. She nodded. She left a card for the hospital's patient advocate on the bedside table and told me she'd check back in the morning. The door swung closed behind her and I was alone. On the table beside me sat the only thing from home they'd sent with the paramedics, My wallet, and clipped to the outside of it, because I always kept it there, was a small photograph. Helen and me at Myrtle Beach, 1987. She was laughing at something off camera, her hand up to keep her hair out of her face, and I was looking at her instead of the lens. We were young enough that neither of us knew yet how much we would need each other. I unclipped the photo and held it in my right hand, the one that still worked the way it was supposed to. "I'm still here," I told her quietly. The next morning, a nurse I hadn't met before came in to check my vitals. Her name tag said Patricia, and she had the unhurried manner of someone who had been doing the job long enough to see through whatever face a patient was wearing. "You look like you're thinking hard," she said, wrapping the blood pressure cuff around my arm. "I have a lot to think about. She pumped the cuff, watched the gauge. "Family coming today?" "I don't think so." She didn't say anything to that, just wrote the number down, unwrapped the cuff, and hung it back on the wall. Then she looked at me directly for the first time. "You know," she said, "I've been on this floor for 19 years. You learn things about people in a place like this. Mostly you learn who shows up and who doesn't." She left it there. She didn't press it into anything. Just let it sit in the air between us, and then she was gone. I reached for my phone on the bedside table. The screen was cracked from the fall. I scrolled to a name I hadn't called in almost a year, not because we'd had a falling out, but because time does that to people. Robert Hines. My oldest friend. We'd played ball together in high school, gone to the same church for 30 years until his wife dragged him to hers, and he had stood beside me at Helen's graveside without saying a word, which was exactly what I needed. He picked up on the second ring. "James," he said, and just the sound of my name in his voice made something in my chest loosen that I hadn't realized was tight. "I'm in the hospital," I said. "Where?" "Mercy General." "Had a stroke." A beat of silence. Then, "I'm on my way." "You don't have to, James," he said my name again, quieter this time. "I'm on my way." He came. He sat in the chair beside my bed for 2 hours that morning, mostly just talking, the way we used to do after church over bad coffee in the fellowship hall. He told me about his granddaughter's school play and a dispute he was having with his neighbor about a fence line, and I let the ordinary weight of it settle over me like something warm. He didn't ask about Marcus or Denise. He had known them both their whole lives, and I think he already understood what had happened without needing me to say it. When he stood up to leave, he squeezed my right hand. "Whatever you're thinking about doing," he said, looking at me carefully, "think it all the way through first, and then call me." "I will," I said. He nodded. "Also," he added, his tone shifting, "there's a woman in my church, Sylvia Garrett. She's a notary and she does estate work on the side. Good woman. Honest. She'll come to you." He said it like it was a simple piece of information, like he was mentioning where to find a good mechanic. He didn't elaborate. He let me sit with it. That night, lying in the dark with the monitors beeping their slow, steady rhythm, I thought about the hardware store. I had sold the 3 locations 8 years ago when my knees started going, but the sale had been good, better than good. I had invested carefully, lived modestly, and what I had built over the course of my life was not a small thing. Marcus and Denise had known, in the vague way that children know about a parent's finances without ever really examining the specifics, that there would be something waiting for them one day. They had been waiting a long time. That was the thing I kept coming back to. Not the anger, not the hurt, but the clarity that cut through both of them. They had not been absent because they were busy or scared or overwhelmed. Marcus had asked about a DNR. Denise had promised to come and chosen not to. These were not accidents. These were decisions. I picked up my phone and called Robert back. "Tell me more about Sylvia Garrett," I said. She came the following afternoon, a small woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a beaded chain and a leather document bag. She sat on the foot of my bed with the efficiency of someone who had done this in more difficult circumstances than a hospital room. She shook my hand, sat down, and looked at me without any preamble. "Your friend Robert tells me you want to update your will," she said. "Yes. He also told me your children haven't visited." "That's correct." She nodded once, the way a person nods when something confirms what they already suspected about the world. "Tell me what you want," she said, "not what you think is fair or what you think you should want." What you actually want. I told her. It took about 20 minutes. She asked clarifying questions, wrote things down, and didn't flinch at any of it. When I was done, she looked at her notes and said, I can have this drafted and notarized by tomorrow morning. The mobile notary service is standard in this county. It'll hold. I want it airtight, I said. It will be. She paused, then added, without looking up from her notes. For what it's worth, Mr. Watkins, in my experience, the people who do what you're describing usually sleep better afterward. She came back the next morning, as promised. I read everything twice. I signed where she told me to sign. The witness she had brought, a young man who worked in a hospital's administrative office, signed too. When it was done, she put the documents in her bag, left me copies in a sealed envelope, and shook my hand again. One more thing, I said before she stood up. There's an envelope I'd like to leave here, in the room, on the pillow. She looked at me with a slight tilt of her head. Not legal, I said. Personal. That's your business, she said, and left me to it. I used 3 sheets of hospital stationery. My handwriting on the left side was worse than it used to be. The letters leaning and uneven, but it was legible. I had always had good handwriting. Helen used to say it was the most surprising thing about me, a man who spent his days lifting boxes and running a register having penmanship like a school teacher. I wrote what I needed to write. Not long, not cruel. I wanted every word to be the kind that could not be argued with or reframed. When I was done, I read it back to myself once, folded it, and sealed it in the envelope Patricia had brought me from the supply closet when I'd asked. I wrote both their names on the front, Marcus and Denise. That afternoon, Dr. Chen came to tell me I was making strong progress. The left side weakness was improving faster than they had expected. My speech was clear. She said if things continued the way they were going, I could be looking at discharge in 2 or 3 days, with outpatient physical therapy to follow. You seem different today, she said, looking at me the way doctors look at patients they're trying to read. I feel different, I said. Good different or? Good different, I said. I decided something. She didn't ask what. She just wrote something on her chart and said, keep that energy. The call came the next morning. Marcus. I looked at his name on the cracked screen for 3 full rings. Then I answered, Dad. His voice was tighter than I expected. Not guilty. Tight. I heard you're doing better. I am. Good. That's good. A pause, the sound of him recalibrating. Listen, I've been meaning to come up there. It's just been... Marcus. He stopped. I know you asked about the DNR, I said. My voice was even. I had rehearsed nothing. The evenness came from somewhere that didn't need rehearsing. Silence on his end. Long enough that I could hear traffic in the background wherever he was. That's not how I was just asking what the options were, Dad. I wasn't saying. You asked the doctor if I had a do not resuscitate order within hours of learning I had a stroke. I said. You didn't ask how I was. You didn't ask if I was conscious. You asked about the DNR. More silence. I'm not calling to fight, I said. I'm calling because I think you should know that I'm aware of what happened. And I think you should know that I've been doing some thinking while I've been here. About the store, about the investments, about what I've built. His voice shifted. A subtle thing. But I had known this voice for 43 years. Dad, whatever you're thinking, let's just wait until you're out and we can all sit down. I've already taken care of it, I said. Quiet. What does that mean? Tighter now. The tightness had become something else. It means I've handled my affairs, I said. You and Denise will understand when the time comes. Right now, I just wanted to hear your voice. I hung up. My hand was completely steady. Denise called 11 minutes later. I knew because I watched the clock. 11 minutes was how long it took Marcus to get her on the phone. Daddy. She led with Daddy, the word she used when she wanted something from me, had used it since she was 7 years old, and I had never once managed to resist it. I felt the tug of it now, the old reflex. And then I felt the way it settled. Felt it clearly for what it was, and the tug released. Hello, Denise. Daddy, I'm so sorry I haven't been there. It's been a genuinely terrible few weeks. Kevin's been having issues at school, and I've had back-to-back shifts. I should have called. I know I should have called. You told Dr. Chen you would come. I said. The first night. You said you'd come as soon as you could. I know. That was 6 days ago. The breath she let out on the other end was sharp and quick, like something punctured. Daddy, please. Whatever Marcus said to you, just wait. Come home first. We can talk. We can figure this out. There's nothing to figure out, I said gently. Because by then, it was true. There was nothing to figure out. Everything was already figured out, signed, witnessed, notarized, and sealed. The only thing left was the envelope on the pillow waiting for them like a quiet fact. I love you, I told her. I meant it. That was the complicated part. The part I had lain awake working through for 3 nights in a hospital bed. You could love someone and still look at what they had shown you clearly. You could grieve what they had become without lying to yourself about what it was. Daddy, take care of yourself, I said, and I hung up. Patricia came in an hour later to check my chart. She looked at me and then looked at the sealed envelope on the pillow of the spare bed on the other side of the room where I'd left it, and she didn't say a word about it. You want lunch today? She asked. I do, I said. Something that actually tastes like something. She laughed, the real kind. I'll see what I can do. Robert came back on the morning of my discharge. He brought a change of clothes from my house because he had a spare key. Had always had a spare key, the way people do when they've been friends for 50 years. He helped me button my shirt while my left hand fumbled with the third button, and he didn't make it into anything. We walked out through the main entrance into cold January air, and I stopped on the sidewalk for a moment and just breathed it. Where to? Robert asked. Home, I said. But first, can you drive past the Riverside Community Center on Oak Street? He looked at me sideways. Why? I want to see what it looks like. I've been thinking about it. He drove me past it. It was a squat brick building with a parking lot that needed resurfacing and a sign out front advertising a seniors fitness class on Thursdays. It looked exactly like what it was, a place that did real work on a small budget and could do more with more. I looked at it for a long moment. Sylvia mentioned they've been trying to expand their after-school programs for 3 years, I said. Can't get the funding. Robert was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Helen volunteered there. Years ago. Before the kids. I had forgotten that. The memory returned in pieces. Helen coming home on a Wednesday evening smelling like the industrial-grade hand soap they kept in the supply closet. Talking about a boy who was learning to read at 9 years old and the look on his face the first time he'd gotten through a whole page. I remembered, I said, which was half true. We sat there in the parked car for a few more minutes, engine running, the community center's brick face catching a winter light. Then Robert put the car in drive and took me home. The house was exactly as I had left it on that Tuesday morning 7 days ago, when I had stood at the counter with the good coffee and the floor had come up to meet me. The mug was still in the dish rack where I'd been about to reach for it. The kitchen held that particular stillness of a space waiting for its person to return. I stood in the doorway and looked at it, the worn linoleum Helen had wanted to replace, and that I'd kept replacing eventually with the same pattern because it was what the kitchen looked like, and the kitchen was what home looked like. The row of hooks by the back door where her coat still hung because I had never moved it. The window above the sink that looked out over the yard where she had planted a garden every year from 1988 until 2019. I walked to the counter, filled the kettle, and made coffee. The good kind. While I waited for it to brew, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote a letter to the director of the Riverside Community Center. I had looked up her name the night before on my phone, lying in the hospital bed. Carolyn Marsh, executive director, 22 years with the organization. I wrote to her the way I used to write to suppliers back in the hardware store days, clearly and without theatrics, explaining what I had in mind and what I hoped it might accomplish. I told her about Helen and the boy learning to read. I told her I had a meeting already scheduled with Sylvia Garrett for the following week to go over the specifics. I signed it James Watkins, folded it, and put it in an envelope. The coffee was done. I poured a cup, stood at the window looking out at the January garden, bare and dormant and waiting for spring the way gardens do, and I drank it while it was still hot. The call came that evening. Not Marcus's number, Denise's. I let it ring, then a few minutes later, a voicemail notification appeared. I didn't listen to it. I set the phone face down on the table beside Helen's photograph and let the kitchen be quiet around me. I wasn't angry. That was the thing that surprised me most. I'd expected anger to be the main weather of these days, the thing I'd have to navigate around. Instead, what I felt was something closer to clarity. The kind that comes after you've made a decision you knew was right and stopped arguing with yourself about it. The door that had swung shut in that hospital room had not opened again, but I had stopped standing in front of it expecting it to. There was a cardinal on the fence post at the edge of the garden, red and absolutely still in the gray afternoon, like something placed there deliberately. Helen had loved cardinals. Whenever one appeared, she said the same thing, said it quietly and to herself, not really for my benefit. Still here, she'd say. Still here, I watched it for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and called Carolyn Marsh at the community center. She answered on the third ring, a little breathless like she'd run for it, and when I told her my name and why I was calling, she went very still on the other end. "Mr. Watkins," she said finally, her voice careful and genuine. "I don't even know what to." "You don't have to say anything yet," I told her. "Let's meet first. Let's talk about those after-school programs. Let's talk about what you need." We made an appointment for the following Thursday. I hung up and stood at my kitchen window as the cardinal finally lifted from the fence post and was gone, a red comma against the gray sky, disappearing into the bare branches of the oak tree at the yard's edge. The yard was quiet. The house was quiet. Somewhere 2 counties away, Marcus was probably on the phone with a lawyer, and Denise was probably drafting a message she would rewrite 4 times before sending. The sealed envelope was still on that hospital pillow. They would go eventually, when enough time passed and enough silence accumulated, and they would find it, and they would read it. What they did after that was not something I could control and had stopped trying to. I was 68 years old. I had built something real. I had loved one woman for 34 years and been loved back just as fully. I had 2 children who had made their choices and an old friend who answered on the second ring. And I had a meeting on Thursday. I poured a second cup of coffee, sat back down at the kitchen table with the late afternoon coming in through the window, and for the first time in a long time, maybe longer than I could put a date to, I thought about tomorrow without dread. Just tomorrow, plain and possible, waiting like a door left open. That was enough. It was more than enough. Thank you for spending this time with me today. If this story reached something in you, I hope you'll share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, come join the family at Voices of Uncle Raymond. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're listening from. Every single one of you matters to this community. Take care of yourselves out there,